land or property, there are various statutory obligations. The relevant obligation is under the Local Government Act 1972, Section 123. The section requires that when the council is disposing of any land or property, it must obtain the best price that is reasonably obtainable. And therefore, there is an obligation for the council to rely on appropriate valuation by a qualified surveyor to value the site and assess the value, the price that is required for the particular site to be transferred to a third party. There is a subsequent provision which enables the council to sell at an undervalue, but there are specific rules that must be complied with. The overriding obligation, though, is to obtain the best price that is reasonably obtainable, and that must be based on valuation. That is the key obligation, Chair.
Thank you very much. I have Councillor Harper first, Councillor Borton, and I'm assuming, yes, that Councillor Harwood would wish to come next.
Okay, right. To help speed and give us a steer to it, I'd like to move that we agree to a freehold disposal of this site. And that's the motion I'm proposing. Okay, if I can just say a few words in support of that. My starting point, well, I'm speaking to a motion I've moved. My starting point would be that I would generally be in favour of leasehold development. However, we've heard a lot of arguments tonight and we've had a lot of information sent to us by the club over the issues between leasehold and freehold. And therefore, I think it's incumbent on us as an authority to work in conjunction with our football club to make sure that they can remain in the borough on a vibrant site and do the works they need to do. And if a freehold disposal is a means to doing that, then I think we need to do that. That's really what I've got to say.
Councillor Barnett, you seconded it. Do you wish to speak at this point?
I did second it, but I don't wish to speak at the moment.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I was going to move precisely what Councillor Harper moved as well. So I'm very happy to support. Look, we've got an opportunity as a council here tonight to, I think, right a wrong from the history that was spoken about before, and that, as Fred Atkins' book makes very clear, this council has got a pretty embarrassing reputation in its dealings with Maidstone United Football Club, and I hope that the committee tonight will agree that this is the opportunity in which we can actually support its future growth and expansion. And as it's successful on the pitch, it needs to expand and be more successful off the pitch as well. We've heard that a leasehold is not acceptable to the club, so it comes down. So that possibility is ruled out. So it comes down to freehold or no expansion at the Gallagher Stadium. So it really comes down to: do you support Maidstone United Football Club, or do you not support Maidstone United Football Club? And ultimately, they are probably the business in the borough of Maidstone with the greatest reach. They are increasingly successful. They are getting more and more fans, including myself and other councillors here, to the ground each Saturday, and they're doing very, very well on the pitch. And as elected representatives of the community, I think we have an obligation to support the club as best as possible. And it would be highly embarrassing were the club to be held back because of a decision that Maidstone Council had taken. And ultimately, this strip of land is not going to be used for anything else. Even Maidstone Council couldn't put a house on there, and we've got a reputation for trying to build houses all over the place. But even we couldn't put a house on this strip of land. And ultimately, I can see no reason why it should be on a leasehold basis. So I'm very happy to support Councillor Harper's motion that this go on a freehold, and that actually we do something for the first time in a long time to support the football club. Thank you.
Councillor Harwood.
Thank you, Chairman. As you're probably aware, the motion which saw planning permission for what is now the Gallagher Stadium to be permitted was actually moved by me. I was heavily involved in framing the community engagement conditions associated with that planning permission, which again is very significant, especially for a ward with some of the issues that mine has. And my position throughout this is wanting to seek safeguards, in that I still wear the scars of the athletic ground in London Road and what occurred there. I'm still slightly traumatised by the toilets there, and there were things about the stadium that weren't good, like the floodlights, which I remember at the Charlton game were a little dysfunctional. However, it was a nice big ground, and it had the room for expansion, and it had dog racing, and you could get Chopper Harris's autograph in the club room and things, and it was a good site. That site ended up as retail sheds, and I think therein lies the rub. I think that the residents of North Ward are happy to perhaps see a release of the freehold for the football club. I think the problem is what happens next, that if the club go on to bigger and better things and the site is sold on, and we end up with a retail shed scenario as we did in London Road, that there are implications which link into the duty upon the council to seek best value for the land disposal. There are other issues around all of the kind of legalese around a transfer of land, such as overage clauses and so on, which will need to be negotiated in good faith. What I hope is, for all the reasons that have been rehearsed, that we are pressing a reset button in relation to our future relationship with the club as a local authority, but I do not, though we're making a decision on the freehold front this evening, there is a long, long way to go before we see a resolution of this matter, and I don't want to see too much emotion coming into this. We're all looking after the best interests of Maidstone, its residents and its football club, and we are not making decisions that we are in order to do anyone down, but we have to behave in a certain way, and we have the benefit of hindsight in ensuring that we do this properly. Thank you.
Thank you. Like Councillor Harwood, as I wasn't chairman of the planning committee at the time, but I was a member of the planning committee, and I was involved, although not as heavily as he was, in the original planning consent, and it's good to see how successful the club has been on that site. We can all, I would characterise the history as being not quite as bad between the council and the club as has perhaps been characterised, but I would certainly say there have been times when we could have done better. Certainly this should not, this situation where we now, however we reached it, could perhaps have been different, but we are where we are now, and we need to go forward and actually make a decision which is both in the interest of Maidstone and the club, which is growing, although I hope we don't have too many weeks of results like the last week, but hopefully the club can do much better and get promotion. We, as a council, need to do all we can to support that within the legal framework that we have to operate within. And I'm hopeful that with the right goodwill and some thinking positively, that we will reach a position where a good conclusion is reached for the club, for the people of Maidstone, and that we will see expansion on this site, and that we will see a club playing before packed houses in League Two in the not too distant future. So I think we're all, most of us and the council, certainly I think almost all of us here tonight are agreed, at least in the initial position, that we should go forward, and there's no great controversy between us. I support the recommendation that's been moved.
Councillor Hastie.
Thank you. Over the past week, I've received more emails about this subject than I probably have in my entire time of being elected, and it's quite clear from... it's quite clear that the support for the club is phenomenal this evening. The owners have invested a huge amount of time and money in the club, and that's to bring football back to Maidstone, and I believe that we should support the venture and the continuing success and the development of the club by offering the land, and I support the motion.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm certainly minded to support the recommendation. The club does bring an awful lot of business into the town, quite apart from supporting sport, which is part of the health and well-being of our community. So I'm leaning in that direction. What I would like to ask, I just need a bit of reassurance, please. The piece of land, the footings of the Millennium Bridge, that's a little bit of reassurance I'd like. Is there anything on this strip of land that affects the bridge or the well-being of the towpath or anything like that? I just want to be doubly sure, if possible.
Mr. Green.
You're right that the strip of land is very close to the footings to the bridge over the river there, and there would have to be provision to make sure that if there were any work needed done to the bridge, then that wouldn't be affected by works that the football club had in mind for the land. So it would have to be taken account of as part of the drawing up the agreement with the club.
Councillor Blackmore.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I have to apologise to all the members of the public. I don't follow football, so you'll have to forgive me for that character flaw. I see this very simply as a head and heart decision. I think it's really easy to get caught up in the emotion of what's happened in the past and who said what. And I think for anyone who's been involved in emotional arguments, we all know that's pretty futile. So let's leave the past where it belongs, in the past, and look forwards, which I believe is what the club is trying to do. So if we start from that point, and if we accept that this strip of land is more valuable than anybody actually thought it could be, then therefore it is a commercial transaction, just as the club is a commercial entity. We as members have a duty to seek the best possible price for this land on behalf of all our residents, whether they follow football or whether they're idiots like me and they don't follow football. I admit my character flaw. So on that basis, I'm content to go with the disposal of the freehold, but I must admit my gut feeling says no, because if you look at people who are incredibly wealthy, they don't sell property. They hang on to it and they seek to acquire more. So if we're to sell it, we have to seek the best possible value on the best possible terms for the council and all of our residents. And only on that basis can I support the motion.
I'll go through the speakers and then I'll try and pull it together. Councillor McLaughlin.
Thank you, Chair. I remain unconvinced that this has strategic benefit to the council, and this is what this debate hinges on, really. If we're prepared to let this go on a 99-year lease, we're giving up whatever strategic benefit there might have been for the next 99 years. And to my mind, that undermines the argument. So I'm in favour of a freehold disposal, but I agree with Councillor Blackmore. We must be very commercial about this. We have a legal responsibility, as has already been explained to us. It's council taxpayers' money that we're dealing with here, and for that reason, I think we must be very careful about the negotiations and the valuation that we put on this. We're dealing with a commercial entity. We must behave ourselves in a commercial way on this. And subject to that, I would support the motion. Thank you.
Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think when I came to this meeting, I thought it would be really difficult to convince me that freehold was the way forwards. I thought the best protection for the council was through the leasehold, the granting a lease option. But having given it further thought, I do actually see that this could be achieved. I think probably where I'm going to disagree with my fellow councillors is that the terms of that freehold, in my view, need to be very simple, very affordable, and something that can be concluded very quickly so that the club can move on with their plans. I did suggest a mechanism that we might want to consider around that, but I suspect that's not the will of the committee. So I do now support the principle of the freehold sale, but I just want to register my concern about the complication that may come from the negotiation.
All right, members, I have nobody else indicating to speak. First of all, I'm going to remind you all of what Ms Narabur said about our responsibilities in disposal, which I think are laid out very clearly. Apart from that, we have a policy which says that we go with leasehold unless there are overriding reasons why we should not. We've hardly touched on that. I can clearly see which way the committee wishes to go. So we still have to, when we actually put this together, we have to actually give a reason as to why we believe that the benefit of doing this, why it would outweigh our own policy. So I'm going to suggest that a case can be made in the work that the football club does with the community at large, because that is considerable. And if you really want to go with it, the footfall that may come to the town centre out of the games when people come here. If we can toughen that up, we need to do so, because whether we like it or not, it looks as though we're going towards a decision that steps outside of our own policy. Councillor Borton, I'll let you come in there if you wish.
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that the policy on land disposal of this council states that we would usually dispose on a leasehold basis. And what we're suggesting here is that unusually we're disposing on a freehold basis. And as Councillor McLaughlin said, I think we should perhaps mention that we are of the view that this particular strip of land only doesn't have much strategic value to the council.
I think there are people who may well hold a different view, and as it happens, I had Councillor Harwood next and then Councillor English.
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, in terms of the strategic value, in terms of the value of that finger of countryside which moves through the corridor of the River Medway, North Maidstone, it is very important for the borough. That the towpath, which has recently been upgraded and so on, is very, very popular with many, many people who are using that site. I think we must look beyond the football stadium as to the future of this site. And if we do see a change of hands, an asset stripping of the site and redevelopment with retail sheds, as occurred in London Road, or with residential, as has occurred on the other side of James Motman Way, that would have a very significant implication. Also, in terms of our negotiating position, I don't think we should start by saying this land is not strategic, because clearly it is, because that's why it is strategic land. That's why we're going through all of this kind of debate as to whether the means of disposal. But I want to just come back to the point, and as I say, I mean, hopefully the club are going on to bigger and better things and will outgrow that site. Yeah, I will still, hopefully be looking after the residents in my patch and don't want hostages to fortune in terms of any nasty surprises in James Watman Way. I'm just very keen to understand if there is any ability, not so much on a clawback, but on a protection in terms of the land when we sign it over, in terms of once the use as a sports stadium ends, would covenants or any other approach be possible that would actually work so that we can ensure that the land goes back to being open, or that there is some other way of protecting it from perhaps a less good neighbour of a development? Thank you.
Who wishes to take that?
Chair, restrictive covenants can be included within the sales agreement. There's issues regarding enforcement of restrictive covenants, but those, and they can be registered against the title of the property. It needs to be carefully worded. If we're proposing that the use of the site be limited to open space in the event that the football club sees occupying the site, then that's something that will have an impact on the negotiations. But again, it's subject to the parties' negotiating terms.
Yeah, if I may come back very quickly. I mean, potentially, this is one of the problems of having to decide something here and there on the night. An approach such as that, which allowed the freehold so that the football club can do what they wish, they can get the financing, they can do everything, but if that use is discontinued, we do see potentially a return to it being open space. That could bring the costs down and change the basis of the negotiation. So, I mean, it potentially could. If you're selling the site as 2% of a site that's worth hundreds of thousands of pounds or millions of pounds, that makes the value very significant. If you're discussing it as land that is either a football stadium or it's open space, that value is much lower, so there is a benefit for the club. But this is an issue that I think is worthy of some investigation, because it could benefit the club and it could benefit the future residents of Maidstone when hopefully the club has gone on to bigger and better things.
I don't want to go on for too long because I think the will of the committee is becoming clear, but there are some issues around this. Councillor English, and have I missed anybody?
I've got no particular objection to exploring the issue of covenants, but I can tell you, having been involved in the planning committee for far too long, that we see covenants come up time and time again and about as much use as a chocolate teapot. They're really, I would not put any reliance in them at all, frankly. However, if people want to explore them, explore them. My view is that the argument about the reason for disposing of this land on a freehold basis has to revolve around the community and the wider economic benefit to Maidstone in terms of sport, in terms of health, in terms of the simple amount of money spent in and around Maidstone as a result of the football ground being used as a football ground and the other activities that take place around there. If you really want to go and broaden it out, we can go back to the original planning consent and look at the community involvement clauses. It shouldn't be particularly difficult. But what I would caution against is trying to write the whole thing now. But I think that's the general approach we should adopt. I don't think we should get into a nitty-gritty discussion of whether this piece of land is strategic for this reason or that reason or not strategic or whatever. I'm quite happy to look at covenants, but I think we should be looking at the community value, the sporting value, the public health value, and, shall we say, the cultural and economic value, and put a rationale around that.
Members, I only mentioned it because you do need to be aware that we do have to make that case. But I think, Councillor English, as usual, you've encapsulated it beautifully. And so as long as everybody's in agreement that that is the case that is made, that's fine. Councillor Harper, just before you come back, I'm going to ask the Chief Exec. We had some discussion under Part 2. We need to actually attach some words to your recommendation that encapsulates what was said, and the Chief Exec has a form of words that she believes we could use, and I'm going to ask her to read them out, and then if you agree, I'll come back to you, Councillor Harper, and then we go to the vote.
Thank you. I thought it was important for transparency and to reflect the decision that you made in Part 2, so in the private session, that should the committee decide to dispose of this land freehold, that you not only said freehold, but also at the valuation price and subject to an overage clause. I think for the purposes of the public's understanding, we need to make that clear, although we considered that in private session because of the commercial sensitivity of the detail of the numbers in that.
So, Councillor Harper.
Yeah, I'm happy to take that as an amendment to the motion. I think also what we probably need to do, bearing in mind what you were saying earlier, Chair, about the fact that we're doing something, if you like, against the council policy on this, we need probably to add in some wording that the council, or something along the lines of the council recognises is against the leasehold policy of the authority. However, in this case, it is felt that the strategic value of our relationship and partnership with the football club overrides the leasehold policy. And then you can add in the points which you were earlier saying about, you know, the community involvement, the benefit of sport and so on. But I think you need to have that built into the resolution so it's clear as to the grounds on which we are going against our council policy.
I'm going to suggest that the actual wording regarding the reasons why we believe it overrides, we've taken that on board, haven't we? And there's been a general agreement that that is the issue. Therefore, as long as it's in our minutes clearly, I don't think that needs to be part of the actual decision. What does need to be part of the actual decision, just a moment, Councillor Burton, are the words that the Chief Exec is actually suggesting. So I'm going to ask her to read those out and see then if Councillor Harper and... He's already said it. Yes, OK. So could you read it? Because I need to know that everybody's got them. Councillor Burton, I hope it's something that's really pertinent.
Directly relevant to this, I think as I indicated earlier, I'm minded to support the freehold sale. I'm less supportive of the conditions of that sale. Could we not have this as two parts, that, you know, perhaps the resolution is to agree the freehold sale subject to the terms set out by the committee, and then, and as far as I understood it, that was already resolved as a motion that we would have. Do you see what I mean? You know, that I want to support the freehold sale.
Councillor Burton, we actually made an agreement in Part 2, but we need to get wording for transparency. We need to get wording into open session. In addition, well,
my request is that we take it as two separate stages, because I want to support the freehold sale, and I'm not inclined to support those terms.
All right, we can do that. So, do you want to read out then what we've got? Councillor Harper, you've said you're in favour of a freehold. Would you please say, I move that the committee agrees to a freehold disposal?
I move that the council proceeds to a freehold disposal of the land in question.
Seconded?
Seconded, Madam Chair.
Okay, I think this is what you intended, although obviously I can't move this, but I can put forward the recommendation, and that is that the freehold disposal should be at the valuation price and subject to an overage clause, and that you delegate authority to the Director of Finance and Business Improvement to negotiate the detail of the terms of the disposal agreement.
That's moved by Councillor Harper again. Is that seconded? Councillor English? No. Oh, Councillor Harwood?
Yeah, I'm happy to second that. However, the point around the negotiations being all-encompassing, so if we are potentially looking at covenants and so on, that everything is within the negotiations. As long as I have some reassurance from that perspective, I'm happy to second that.
The issue is that we need to capture these points in the minutes very clearly. I think you've got them, haven't you, Mr Bailey? And as long as they are captured, and when we come back to agree the minutes, we're sure that all these points are in, then I think we're home and dry. Can I ask those in favour? Councillor Harper moved it. Can I ask for those in favour of that wording to indicate, please? All bar one. Those against? One. And no abstentions. Thank you all for what's been a very long session. I'm going to give what I'd like is for everybody, for the committee to sit here for a minute while we ask people to leave now, and then we'll have a fight. Unless you wish to stay for the rest of the meeting, to which you are welcome to do. But members, there may well be a queue downstairs, but I'm sorry, but I certainly need a break. But if there isn't a queue, we'll be back very quickly, but I'll give it till 9, and then we must crack on.